Thank you for joining us for Rosie Rewired, a podcast about women who are building, leading, and shaping technology, not as an exception, but as an everyday reality. Here we drop the rose-colored myths and keep our rosy-colored truth, the lived experience, the nuance, the honesty. These are grounded conversations. We talk about what actually works, what does not, and what needs to be built next, thoughtfully, candidly, and without hype. Rosie Rewired exists because we cannot model what we do not see. Thus, we need our daughters to see this happening. Let's see who influenced us today. So today on the Women in Tech podcast, I'm thrilled to welcome Roselle Safran, CEO and founder of KeyCaliber. Roselle is a powerhouse in cybersecurity with a career that has spanned from the Department of Homeland Security and the White House to building innovative startups that redefine how organizations understand and manage cyber risk. Through KeyCaliber, she is helping companies see what truly matters in their digital ecosystems. Roselle, it's a pleasure to have you and talk about your journey. Let's get into it.
Thank you.
So you founded KeyCaliber to solve a problem that you felt the industry was failing to address. Can you talk about the moment that you realized cybersecurity needed a fundamentally different approach, and what is your approach with that?
Yeah, so it was after many years of seeing security teams just drowning and having limited resource. And so when you have that type of situation where you're just overwhelmed and you only have few resources, you really want to focus on prioritization.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no choice, ruthlessly prioritize. And I was seeing that the challenge the security teams always had was if they were going to try to prioritize, and sometimes that wasn't done at all, but if they were going to try to, they were always looking at it from the lens of, is this a security concern? Which makes plenty of sense. We're security folks. We look at the world from a security perspective. But the other side of it, is it a business concern? Because if it's not a business concern, then even if it is a security concern, it doesn't need to be what the team spends their limited resources on. And I felt there was this huge gap between what was happening on the business side and what the security team knew. And so I wanted to bridge that. And in the past, if the security team had any understanding of what the critical assets, the crown jewels were,
Mm-hmm.
it was because months and months were spent doing interviews and questionnaires and asking folks, well, what do you think is important? And you get all sorts of errors and omissions. And then you get ulterior motives on top of it. So folks will say, oh, yeah, this is really critical because they want more funding for their department. Or they'll say, this is not critical because they don't want to deal with extra security controls. And by the time that whole process was finished, the data was stale. So it didn't work. And it just wouldn't be of value to the security team. And so I saw this, I said, well, we need to have a process that's number one, data driven. And number two is automated. And number three is continuous.
Right.
And so that's what we built. And it just seamlessly becomes part of the security data that you then have.
Oh, so seamlessly is the huge help for everyone because they don't want to. It seems like 2FA is just an enormous burden for some people, and it's so critically important. But you also talked about the sort of crown jewels approach and the core of the risk prioritization. So I know that KeyCaliber goes in its wide-ranging direction on them, but how can you explain how you do that? How you help companies identify them, and then also what happens when they're not identifying them correctly?
Yeah, well, so often we do find that our results will show, hey, these are critical assets. And then the customer will say, oh, yeah, they are. I hadn't thought about that. That's happened plenty of times. So the way that our technology works is we take the security logs that are sitting around collecting dust. So we have a couple of data sources that we require, those being the EDR data, vulnerability scanner data, also really like to have traffic and identity and access management data. Now, more data sources, that's even better. One of the common ones we get after that is a CMDB, because we have to reconcile it because it's really out of date. But we only need a couple data sources, and they're standard with every security stack these days. And from that, then we parse out all of the assets. So we'll see all the assets in the environment, including the shadow IT, which often gets overlooked. We see it in the traffic, so we can still identify it. And then for each and every asset, we automatically compute an impact score, an asset criticality score. And this is done using our asset behavior analytics. So we're looking at what's running on the asset, who's accessing it, how it's interacting with other assets. Sometimes we have information on what type of data is on it. We'll include that as well. Sometimes we can get good clues just from the host name, the host name, the SQL Server or prod or something like that. And we pull in all of those components of it to compute this impact score from 0 to 100. And the ones over a threshold, and the customer can decide what their threshold is, what 75, is it 80, 85. And then those all bubble to the top with everything that they do. Because now this asset criticality score, this impact score, can be fed into all of their other systems if their security team is working in some other product and they don't want to change their workflow, or they could just see it in our user interface and see, okay, here are the ones that are most critical, and here's how we're doing in terms of security coverage gaps. Here are the vulnerabilities on it. Here are the alerts that are relating to it. And it's all just right there. There was no lift required by the security team to have that business impact intelligence.
Yeah, I remember when we were doing a client sort of dashboard example, it was just amazing to see how there were things that they weren't thinking about that were actually exposed and that were critical systems. It was really illuminating to walk through that process with you. Everybody's talking about budgets and CISOs and boards. And so when CISOs struggle to communicate risk in terms of how boards think about it, how does your platform really transform those technical alerts into a financial impact that a CFO can care about when he's getting reports from the CISO?
Yeah. So we also have the capability to group assets into business applications. And so you can see, okay, all these assets, if are part of this business application, they're all really critical. This is a critical business application. Or the converse, you have this business application, but you don't know the components, and we can do that association. And that's an important linkage, because when you're talking to the CEO, you're talking to the board, they don't know anything about 10.7.3.12. That means nothing to them. And so you have to put it in terms that they understand. So that particular asset is part of this big revenue generating business application. Now you'd start talking from that perspective of, hey, this business application, well, we know all the components of it. It has 10 assets that are part of it. And of those 10, we're finding X, Y, and Z have these vulnerabilities. The X, Y, and Z have these coverage gaps. And then it becomes something that's real, because they could see, oh, this is something I care about. And then it's not amorphous at that point, something I care about, and there's a problem with it. And so then you can have a conversation where you're on the same page, as opposed to it just being very abstract and technical. And for some people that are not technical, they shut down when you start getting technical.
Yes.
And so you're just not having that communication that you need to have. So part of the CISO's job is to be able to translate that technical into business terms. And how can you do that if you don't know what's critical from a business standpoint? It's much harder, much, much harder.
Yeah, exactly. We also work with a lot of MSPs, and they still have clients on like break fix. So if I were that MSP, how would you use KeyCaliber Snapshot to open the client's eyes and then move them into a much better ongoing managed security cadence? Like, walk me through that journey.
Yeah. So we have a bunch of MSP and MSSP customers, and they love our technology because we can show very quickly, okay, here are all the assets you have, and here are all the coverage gaps you have. And by the way, these are the really critical ones, and look how you're doing on those. And it's very straightforward, and it's very clear when there's an issue. And there usually is, because the reality is folks don't know everything that they have.
Right.
And with a lot of MSSPs and MSPs, they're relying on the client to tell them where their assets are, and then they'll try to get an agent on that. But they generally don't know all of that. We usually find that our customers, they're missing some fraction. How big that fraction is varies, but they're not seeing everything. And it's too hard in today's environments. You have on-prem, you have cloud, you have guest network. And there's just so much going on that they can't keep track of all of it. And so for a service provider, an MSSP or an MSP, they have to take the client's word for it. And that's a big problem when they're then on the hook for making sure that they're properly securing it. And so we can quickly do an assessment. A lot of times we start with just a security coverage assessment. So we'll say, here are all your assets, and here are where your coverage gaps are for those assets. And these are in particular the ones you want to hone in on, because these are the coverage gaps on your high impact, your critical assets.
Okay. So if you're an MSP owner looking to bring this to the client roster, what are your top sort of success tips? Are you using per asset discovery or leaning on multi-tenant comparisons for QBRs? Like, what the early pitfalls to avoid?
Well, so we have customers that use them in two different ways, that use our technology in two different ways. Some just say, hey, we need to have this as part of the core offering. And a lot of times folks do that because then, one, they get that true asset count, and they get that true coverage analysis. And that can actually lead to more revenue for them, because they've been shortchanging themselves on the number of assets because they didn't know all of them. And often they're also doing a markup on an EDR, and they don't have coverage on all of the assets, especially the ones they didn't even know about. So then they say, we're just going to install this because it's going to pay for itself. So it can be just part of the core base offering. With some of our customers, they'll make it part of a premium offering. And when they're doing that, then that's cool, because then they're using our differentiator as their differentiator. So our ability to identify the critical assets, they can talk to their clients, say, hey, look, we can identify the critical assets. And the other folks go, are they going to show you that? No, not unless they have the KeyCaliber platform underneath. And so it allows them to prove they're providing this added value. They're showing the customer something that they don't even know about themselves.
Right. And discovery and communication. Back to what we started with.
There you go. Absolutely essential.
Yes, indeed. If you could give one sort of piece of advice to a CISO today, what would you tell them to focus on in 2026, the following year?
So I've been harping on this concept for a long time, but it really comes down to not chasing the shiny object and focusing on just the core essentials. Get that right. And you can build on top of that. But the shiny objects are not going to solve all your problems. And if you don't have a strong foundation, they're not going to be as effective as they can be. So often I like to talk about the NIST CSF, the NIST cybersecurity framework. And when I talk about it, I tell people, hey, think of it as like a pyramid, where the first layer is identify. if you get that right and that's solid, that's your foundation, then you know what you need to protect. And if you know what you need to protect, then there's less that you'll have to detect and respond and recover from. So it behooves you to make sure that foundation of identify is solid and that protect is solid. And it's cyber hygiene, it's the fundamentals. It's really easy to get lost and to lose that concept when there's so much that's just being thrown at folks, especially around AI now. And I will say, like, one of the fundamentals is like understanding and identifying what's using AI and how. We're playing in that space that lots of folks are starting to look into that. Yes. So from that standpoint, AI is being adopted in your organization. You do need to factor that in, but still, you want to go through those paces and start with identify and then protect it. And then you'll just have so much less that you need to do on the reactive side. Like, being proactive makes a world of difference. You don't, if it was a physical building, you wouldn't say, hey, let's just like not worry about where the windows and doors are and let's not lock them. Like, no one thinks like that. So it shouldn't be the same on the cybersecurity side. And so that's been one of my mantras for a long time. Just like keep it simple, start with the basics. And then you could start adding those fancy, shiny objects on top of it once you have that foundation really strong.
Exactly. So that ounce of prevention is the key. So now I'm going to ask you the same question, but thinking about a CEO or a board who doesn't necessarily have the same focus on security and on risk and on governance. So what would be your best advice to them for staying ahead?
Well, for them, it's more about recognizing that cybersecurity is an issue and understanding that cyber risk is business risk. And the days of just thinking, oh, I'm not going to spend on cybersecurity until we're hacked, those days are long, long over. In every industry, you can see examples of companies losing millions and millions, if not billions of dollars when there is a bad attack. And so from the CEO perspective, it has to be, yes, we understand this cyber risk is business risk. And yes, we are going to do something about it. And when the tone starts at the top, then it is more effective all the way through the organization. But if the CEO is coming at it from, oh, this is just another cost center and like, why are we spending money on this? We've got to figure out how to tighten the belt and reduce our expenses. That's the wrong approach, the wrong approach. So again, it's the fundamental of recognizing there's a problem. And then you can take the proper steps because you can devote the right resources to it. So there has to be budget for it so that you get the right people and you get the right technology. And if you have your head buried in the sand and you think, no, we're going to be fine, that's just not a valid business strategy these days.
Right. No, not at all. We talk a lot about sort of cultural alignment. And part of that also has to say, like, well, you need to know the culture that your business is operating in. And cyber risk is a huge piece of that. It's an interesting conversation because there are still a lot of CEOs and boards who are like, we don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's scary. I mean, and for any organization that's like that, I always tell the CISOs, look, just find 2 of your peers that have had a bad attack. And just say, look what happened to them. Look how much downtime they had.
And no one's immune.
And they can say, look what happened to them. Now, how are we any different? We're not really that different. And frankly, if we're different, it's different in a negative way. It's different. Oh, we've spent less on cybersecurity and focused on it less. So once you have that kind of comparison, so it's taking the technology out of it. and just discussing it in business terms. Our competitor got hit. That was a problem for them. That could happen to us. There are plenty of situations now where a company will be hit and then its competitor will do really well because then the customers need to go elsewhere. And so that can happen in your direction as well, where you lose a customer because you're down for 3 weeks due to a ransomware attack. You may or may not get them back.
Right. Yep. And then, I don't even want to go down that road. And we almost got through a whole podcast without talking about AI, but we did talk about AI a little bit. But how do you think AI is really playing in the security field at the moment?
There's so much to it. There's a lot to unpack. Yeah, as cybersecurity professionals, we are always a little behind the curve on two fronts. We're always a little behind the attackers. They're inventing new approaches and we've got to respond to that. But similarly, we're always a little bit behind the technology and we have to respond to that, whether it was cloud or IoT and now AI. There's always something new that's coming up from a technology perspective that then means we've got work to do to protect it. And so that's where we're at with AI. And there's different facets of that. So there's AI being used by attackers when they're doing their attacks. And then there's when attackers are attacking the AI that you've built and doing prompt engineering or coming up with other ways to extract information. So there are definitely lots of challenges with AI being used by the bad guys. But on the flip side, there are also lots of ways that the defenders can be using AI. And so KeyCaliber uses AI. Lots of technologies are using AI for different aspects of that NIST CSF pyramid. And there's a ton of value to gain from that, from the automation and the ability to just correlate in a way that human brains don't. And also for anything related to reporting or documenting. And this is an area I think it's sometimes overlooked from a security standpoint because it's much more glamorous to talk about, oh, look, this works for detection. But reporting, just doing any documenting for a SOC, for a security operations team, that's usually what comes last. Because it's not the fun stuff. I used to do computer forensics. You want to do the analysis. You don't want to spend all the time writing the report. But that's a great way for an LLM to come in to do that report. And so now you have much better findings and documentation for every type of incident, the big ones and the small ones. And then you can throw that in an LLM so they can learn and extract more analysis out of that. So there are so many different facets of how AI could be used to help on the defender side as well. But we're always going to be playing catch up. That's just part of it.
Yeah, feels like a lot of catch up. All right, now I'd like to switch gears a little bit on you and ask about I'm trying to be very PC here, your observation of gender roles in cybersecurity.
There's a lot that I could discuss on this. Everybody knows women make up a small fraction of the cybersecurity workforce. Are those numbers getting better? Some places, the answer is yes. Some places I feel that's questionable. And so I think it's still a challenge for recruiting women into the field because they don't want to be the only woman in the room. And I get that because back when I was a practitioner, I was often the only woman in the room. And so I get how for some women that that would be a deal breaker. For me, that didn't matter. I certainly don't need everyone to look or act like me in order for it to be a productive work environment. In fact, I prefer it not to be like that. I much prefer diversity.
Right.
And for me, I just looked at it as, this is something that interests me, so I'm going, regardless of who else is in it. But it does become a deterrent for a lot of women. And so I'm always trying to encourage women to get into the industry if they're like in college or they're thinking of career switches. And I just say, look, there is a lot that you can do. And sometimes I'll hear, oh, but I'm not that technical, which drives me crazy when people say that, because you can learn skills. Like, none of it is
right.
so complex that it can't be learned. But beyond that, even if that's not what's of interest, there are aspects of cybersecurity that aren't particularly technical. Certainly, any leadership role, it's, yes, understanding the technical aspects at a high level is important, but you're not going to be doing computer forensics or malware analysis if you're in a leadership role. But what you do need to make that translation. You're like being the translator is a big part of the role. So that can still be done regardless of your background. You can get spun up on the security topics. A couple other areas that I feel like they're more likely to have women in them because they're not technical are on the legal side, legal and privacy. There's a lot of women in those areas. And also threat intelligence, because there's a sociology component to it. And it's a lot of data gathering. So there are a lot of women in that area that are really talented as well. But with that said, yeah.
I didn't know that.
But even in the really technical roles, there are plenty of very talented women, and it is achievable. It is absolutely achievable. And I always encourage women to go for it if it interests them.
Okay. And what age group do you think that you need to start focusing women on those kinds of roles? Because I have my own opinion, but I'll leave that alone.
I look at this from a different perspective. I think what's more important than the type of role or the type of work is the confidence that you can do the work. And that is a big challenge for a lot of girls. It's something that you start to see, particularly by middle school and high school, is self-confidence just drops. And it's sad, and it's a societal issue. And I can go on a very long tangent about that. I won't in this. Yeah,
I'll lend you my soapbox.
But I think that is the core of the challenge. Because if you have the self-confidence, then it doesn't matter who else is in the room. And it doesn't matter if it's something that you knew how to do before or not. Hey, I can do this. And it interests me, so I'm going to do it. Completely different concept than, starting to learn the skills. Now, with that said, learning the skills earlier can help with getting that confidence, for sure. So I think it's great in general. It's for middle schoolers and high schoolers to have an understanding of cybersecurity and cyber safety. That's really important. But then who's going to go into what field? Like, a lot of that is going to come down to whether the woman feels comfortable going into something where she's going to have to see a room where it's maybe 20% women, maybe. When I first started in computer forensics, I knew nothing in that field. Nothing. I saw a job posting for a computer crime investigator role, and it just sounded really cool. And so I convinced the hiring manager, I'll learn on the job. And I agreed to get my CISSP and my NK certified examiner certification, and I got those. And so I got up to speed, but it was all on the job training, which also works very well for me, because that's the ideal way for me to learn, is just by doing. But going into that interview, this was very early. This was 2004. So there weren't a ton of people that had that skill set.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a lot easier to come in and say, hey, I don't know computer friends, but I will learn it. If it's something that's of interest, if you have the confidence, you can just walk in and say, I will learn it. And I want to move forward in it because it's something that I'm interested in.
That's amazing. Like, I'm so proud of you for going in there and doing that. Like, that had to take some serious guts, and you sold it well because you got the job. So that's fantastic. Gosh, I don't know how we didn't figure out how to get that story in there earlier. But how did you get your first job? This has been a great conversation, Roselle. Thrilled to be chatting with you. Is there anything else that you want to discuss? I'm sure there were plenty of things I missed asking. Is there anything you want to touch upon that we didn't?
I think we covered a lot of great ground.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating industry, and we're fighting the good fight, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. There is a lot of work to be done. Yeah. It's amazing. I haven't been in tech for most of my career. It's very new, thrown in the deep end of the pool, but I'm fascinated by cybersecurity. Like, it just fascinates me. So I love learning more. I will never get to your status, I'm sure, but knowing the different lingo and threats and all that has been really exciting to learn. It's great to talk to you and others to learn even more. So at this point, then, we'll have to say we'll wrap it up. It was amazing to have you on here, and we're really excited about working with KeyCaliber.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great talking with you.
Thank you for spending this time with Rosie Rewired. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please see our show notes on how to contact us.